Valve has officially revealed the Steam Machine price, and it's awful. The base model with a 512GB SSD and no controller costs $1,049 US, and that increases to $1,349 for the 2TB model. It will be available on June 30th, and we have some thoughts. So Steve and I thought it'd be a good time to chat and break down everything about the Steam Machine. You know, its lackluster performance, its extremely high price, and how it compares with other gaming options, even in this world of crazy memory prices. So, Steve, what are your initial thoughts on the Steam Machine and the things you've seen so far?
Well, my initial thoughts are this went pretty much exactly as we predicted it would when it was first announced, and we looked over the specs and we speculated as to what the pricing would likely be, what it needed to be, and yeah, it's ended up being basically what we thought it would be. I think at the time we said it would likely be around $900 US, and things have only got worse since then. So, you know, coming in at a $1,050 US for the entry-level model, pretty well what we were expecting. I know a lot of people criticized us at the time, saying it's going to be a lot cheaper than that. There was speculation of more like $500 US, and you know, we knew that was never going to be the case. And of course, you can say memory pricing, RAM crisis, all of that, but ultimately it doesn't change anything. Like, it's not a way to say, oh, well, the Steam Machine's only bad because of this. It was really being built on old, outdated AMD hardware that they weren't going to be able to provide at a price that was ever going to make sense. It's the same problem that Intel's come up against with their Arc series. They're just a bit too far behind the eight ball here. So,
Yep.
you know, there's only so much they can get away with, and there's no point at which they can price these where they're going to make sense. And that's what the Steam Machines run into. And yeah, it's probably priced even worse than what we thought. The performance, though, is exactly where we were expecting it to be. So Gamers Nexus has provided a very in-depth review. I've watched about 50% of it. I think it's almost an hour long, so pretty tough to watch all of it so quickly, but I got halfway through, and the main thing obviously I focused on was the gaming benchmark. So did you want me to go over some of that data yet?
Let's go over the benchmarks. And I guess we should be clear as well that, we don't have a Steam Machine. So we've looked at the reviews from other people to assess the performance. And obviously we've got the official price. So this is our analysis of those things. I think that they are actually releasing the Steam Machine in Australia, but the review program, I guess, didn't extend out our way. So yeah, take us into the performance as you've seen from Gamers Nexus and other channels.
Yeah, so we knew that the GPU was going to be, at best, somewhere around an RX 7600 in terms of performance. The way that it's integrated into the system, it probably wasn't going to work as well as the discrete solution, and that's absolutely been the case. So a discrete 7600, it's about 15% faster than the Steam Machine. So, you know, it's ballpark. There were some margins where they saw like a 24%, 20% gain. And there was one example where they were basically the same performance. I think it was Oblivion Remastered. The discrete GPU was 2% slower. So same performance. They should be at best about the same, really. But yeah, the discrete GPU is 15% faster on average. So not a great start. Intel's Arc B580, that was on average 23% faster. And, you know, those cards can be had pretty cheap these days, probably not as cheap as they need to be in order to justify buying them over current generation AMD or NVIDIA hardware, but they're certainly some of the cheaper discrete GPUs you can buy. And it has 12 gigabytes of VRAM, so it's got that in its favor.
Yes, they're slightly below $300 US on Newegg right now. $290 is the cheapest B580 model.
Yeah, so the MSRP is $250, but of course, RAM crisis, DRAM crisis. So the fact that that price is pretty good for, I guess, what you get, I'm still not convinced it's necessarily a great buy at that price. You're probably better off spending a little bit more to get like a RTX 5060, for example. And then even that's not a good buy because you probably just get the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte or something. But when compared to the RTX 5060, well, that GeForce GPU is 50% faster on average, according to the Gamers Nexus data. And that was really consistent. There was one game, I think Starfield, where that margin was reduced to 35%. But generally speaking, you can expect as the average suggests, 50% more performance. It was generally in the range of 40 to like 56%, somewhere in there. So that's not good. That's a huge
No.
performance increase. And I would say people don't exactly hold the RTX 5060 in the highest of regards. It's not exactly like an amazing entry-level GPU that provided incredible performance or anything. And then we have probably what is the better value entry-level, mid-range GPU, dare I say, in the 9060 XT. And you're looking at about 62% better performance from a 9060 XT on average. And it doesn't really matter whether it's 8 or 16 gigabyte model for sort of the lower quality 1080p testing that was largely done, because
Yeah, the Steam machine has 8 gigabytes of memory, so comparing it to other 8 gigabyte cards is perfectly fine. And obviously, you know, we would prefer that it had more memory, as we have been saying for all discrete GPUs for PC gaming for a long time now. But because it is an 8 gigabyte product, relevant comparisons like a 5060, and so having additional raw performance actually does make a difference in situations where you're not as memory constrained. I was also interested in some of the other channels like Digital Foundry, who were comparing it in some tests to game consoles, because I personally see this as a game console as opposed to a gaming PC alternative. We'll probably talk about why that is the case later. But it was interesting to see that the performance isn't that different to the base PS5 model. So the Sony PlayStation 5 base model, it's, you know, trades blows. It depends on the exact title that you're looking at as to whether the PS5 is faster or slower in games where there's not, you know, heavy frame rate caps. You know, the Steam machine does have a more powerful CPU than the PlayStation 5. It is using a more modern architecture in that sense, but the GPU is very weak compared to console hardware. So in games where, you know, the console where it's largely GPU limited, the PS5 might be slightly faster. And in games where it's more CPU limited, you might see the Steam machine edge ahead. But it is certainly around the level of that base model. It's not at the level of the PlayStation 5 Pro, for example, which is the mid-cycle refresh with additional GPU performance and resources, and that can do, you know, more advanced upscaling and things like that. So it's not it isn't a powerful system, is I guess what we're getting at. We assumed it wouldn't be based on the specifications that we saw. You know, it's using outdated architectures. It seems to just be using, I guess, discarded laptop parts, and that is reflected in the performance. Like it hasn't produced performance above the level of hardware that you're getting. There's been no real, at least from what I can see, like optimization to sort of get more out of this hardware like you might see from a console. It seems to be you're just getting standard PC levels of performance from the hardware that they're giving you.
Well, it is certainly premium pricing, which some people may see as an irrelevant comparison, but I think it's somewhat relevant, is with a higher end GPU like the RX 9070, because you can buy those just shy of $600 US at the moment. You can certainly get them for $600 US. How much faster do you think an RX 9070 is?
Well, I mean, if you're saying a 9060 XT is, you know, 60% faster, a 9070 has got to be what, like twice as fast as this system.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it's not just going to be faster, it's going to enable you to use high visual quality settings because it has more VRAM.
Totally different experience. Yeah. Well, according to the Gamers Nexus data, it's 152% faster on average.
Oh, that's a bit more than I was expecting. So yeah, that is massively faster.
And again, it was reliably, like, there was the smallest margin seen was in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. That was 128%. Starfield, you know, we went up to 178%, but the average was 152, which was, yeah, we're in the 150, 160% range for the majority of the games that were tested. Massively faster, obviously higher quality settings, higher resolutions, higher frame rates. All of those things become possible if you buy an RX 9070 system, which, you know, for the top end Steam machine pricing does start to become a reality.
Yes, so let's talk a little bit about the pricing, because obviously the main issue here isn't the performance, because the performance is always going to be fine at the right price. That's generally how it works. The issue is the performance that you're getting at the price of $1,049
The
US.
only caveat there being that the performance in some newly released games is so bad it's difficult to enjoy those games.
Yeah, that is true. I guess there is a level where you just wouldn't recommend it for any sort of price.
If you are hoping to get a really cheap gaming PC to play Forza Horizon 6 or some upcoming games, let's say, maybe even games released next year, not a great option because it's going to struggle in many of those games. So you got to be sort of careful when you say that sort of stuff, because there are similar priced or just slightly more expensive options that will allow you to play those games at really respectable frame rates.
Yeah, so I was just having a look. I was sort of initially thinking of this as like, what would a casual gamer do? Because I think we've seen maybe slightly different opinions from people.
What would
comparing,
you do, Tim?
Well, no, I think thinking a bit different to that even.
Oh, wow.
So I'd seen a lot of opinions. I think they differ quite a bit between the PC enthusiasts compared to people who are just sort of thinking of this like, oh, it's a Valve console, right? Like it's not, I'm just going to slap this in my TV and it's not too bad. So, I mean, console prices is probably a good position to start as a comparison. The PS5 digital version, so the base model, is $600 US. So this is a much more expensive, like for a similar sorts of levels of performance, much more expensive. The PS5 Pro is $900. And then Microsoft's consoles, you've got the Xbox Series S 512 gig digital versions. This is basically the cheapest entry point to gaming at the moment, as far as a desktop sort of system. That's only $380 US. So that is much cheaper than a Steam machine. The Series X digital is $600 as well. So essentially, I've seen a lot of arguments being like, well, this is a Steam machine, plays a Steam library. PC games are cheaper. If you do buy a PS5 for $600 for the Steam machine price, you are essentially getting the ability to buy any 6 AAA $70 games that you like day one before you reach the price of a Steam machine. So PS5 plus 6 AAA games, of any ones that you want, for a similar sort of price. But what really caught my eye, and I think is probably going to be the focus of this discussion, is just having a look on Best Buy, which is where I got the pricing of all these consoles, on the pre-built PCs that they offer at Best Buy. Because you don't just have to buy a PS5. You can buy any sorts of pre-builts from the companies that are offering on there. And for the base model price of $1,050, it was very common to see systems with 16 gigabytes of memory and 1 terabyte SSDs with the GPU that's around the level of an RTX 5060 or the 9060 XT 8 gigabyte. So that is pretty much, if you go, and this isn't just like I'm looking at the cheapest on sale model and trying to make a really unfair comparison between the MSRP of the Steam machine and like a ridiculously discounted Best Buy PC. I'm saying there was a lot of system options available with this sort of configuration, and most of them seem to be maybe either slightly discounted or not really discounted at all. So I'm assuming that you've seen similar in the sorts of comparisons that you've looked at, because I think you looked at Australia as well to have a look at some pre-builts.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I only had a really quick look and it wasn't a favorable quick look. So for those that don't know, the base price for the 512 gigabyte model here in Australia of the Steam machine is $1,609. And then the 2 terabyte version is $2,109.
Mm-hmm.
So already, like, you could just do so much better than that. I went over to PC Case Gear and their cheapest gaming PC. Now, this is a BYO OS system, so it doesn't come with Windows 11 installed, but that's 1,300 Australian dollars, and you get a Ryzen 5 5600, which is a more powerful CPU. It comes with the RX 9060 8 gigabyte, which is a much more powerful GPU. As I just said, 62% faster on average in the Gamers Nexus benchmarks. 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory in a dual channel configuration, and it's on a B550 motherboard. So that is a significantly more powerful gaming PC. It also comes with a 1 terabyte SSD, so twice as much internal storage when compared to the base Steam machine, and you save 300 Australian dollars, which you could use to buy another 2 terabytes worth of internal storage if you wanted to. You could get an additional 16 gigabytes of RAM. you can upgrade the CPU, or you could probably just about get an RX 9070 in that system for, you could definitely do that for the price of the base model Steam machine. So there's that. There's also, there's Arc B580 system, similar spec for less than the base model Steam machine. You're looking at about 1,450 Australian dollars. And then they've got a 9060 XT 16 gigabyte card for the exact same price as the Steam machine. So you can buy a Ryzen 5 5600 system. And these are in and by the way, the last few systems I've talked about have Windows installed. So this system, for example, it's called the PC Case Gear Nightmare. It's a Ryzen 5 5600, as I said, 9060 XT 16 gigabyte, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory, and it comes with Windows 11, activated, all the drivers installed, fully ready to go. You just have to install Steam or whatever game platform you want to, download your games, and away you go. And this comes with a CryoRig CPU cooler, so it's going to be very quiet. It's a B550 motherboard.
And it looks nice. I know one of the arguments has been the Steam machine is this nice compact system. And obviously these systems that we're talking about are not small form factor compact, but this is in a nice looking case. Like it looks perfectly fine to me. It doesn't look cheap, for example.
No, it actually looks, in my opinion, it looks much more impressive than the Steam machine. This looks like a serious gaming rig. So it's got all your gamer elements. It's got 3 120mm ARGB fans at the front. It's got a rear fan. It's got 2 fans in the top. So this is a well-stocked, well-built system. And again, it's all PC Case Gear do excellent cable management. We're not paid by them. We're not sponsored by them or anything. It's just we know them to be a good example. But yeah, this you can go to their website. This is a great looking system. This is something that a kid my daughter's would much prefer to have this than the Steam machine. The Steam machine's pretty boring. Yeah, it's little, but again, we can build Mini-ITX systems, which we'll probably talk about a bit later on. But that being the same price here in Australia as the base model Steam machine is just criminal. The difference you're getting there is absolutely insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I guess there's been this sort of argument that it's not, the Steam machine price isn't outrageous compared to entry-level PC systems. That's been a lot of the cope that I've seen from the sort of, I guess, Valve fanboys who are trying to justify the Steam machine price. But again, the reality is based on the things that we've been talking about that it isn't the same as an entry-level PC. And in fact, an entry-level PC is offering you a better experience, and in fact, a significantly better experience. And it's not just, in my opinion, about the performance of the system, which is obviously better from the comparison points that we've been showing, but it's about the upgradability and usability of the system as well. So I know people want to say the Steam machine has Steam OS, it's configured out of the box, it just runs Steam games, and you don't have to deal with the issues of configuring Windows and that sort of thing. And fair enough, I get that opinion. Windows sucks. We've made a podcast on our podcast channel about how bad Windows is. We're all aware of that situation. But the problem with the Steam machine is that it's not upgradable, and Steam OS doesn't run some of the world's most popular games, which is an issue that we've talked about in our podcast previously, when we sort of were looking at some of the more popular multiplayer titles that are not compatible with SteamOS. So for a start, those PC Case Gear systems or the Best Buy systems will allow you to run any Windows supported game, which will include, very popular titles like Fortnite and those sorts of games. But on top of that, you can change out the CPU, you can change out the GPU if they become inadequate over time. So these systems, the cheap ones with a 9060 8 gigabyte or 16 gigabytes of memory, we all understand that that's not great today and that a lot of these components are limited by the memory crisis. But in a couple of years, if pricing improves and GPUs are much faster and memory is a bit more affordable, if you buy one of these systems that are pre-built, you can swap out and improve that situation for you just a couple of years later. Whereas with the Steam machine, you can upgrade the SODIMM memory, for example, and swap out the SSD, but you can't change the GPU, you can't change the CPU. And so if you want to adjust those things, you have to effectively throw out the entire system and swap over to something else. Of course, you could sell it, so I'm not necessarily saying you just put it in the bin, but it is a much more significant changeover. And so to me, my thought has always been that systems that are not upgradable need to be cheaper than an equivalent PC that is upgradable. Upgradable is a feature that you want to have that makes the system better. And so for that, you can charge a more premium price. But what we're seeing with the entry PCs compared to the Steam machine is the opposite. The entry PCs are offering you better performance now and are upgradable for a similar price. Or you can get a similar performance experience for a lower price. Whereas in my opinion, it should be the opposite. The Steam machine, without those upgradable options, it should be giving you better value. It should be in some way subsidized to compensate for the fact that the main components are soldered to the, I guess, main board in that system.
Yeah, look, there's no sugarcoating it. This thing is dead on arrival in any kind of value sense, practical sense. It is just dead on arrival.
I agree.
I don't know how you could come to any other conclusion. I actually thought that I was very surprised by the Gamers Nexus review. Again, I haven't watched all of it, but I have watched their entire conclusion. I watched all of the testing stuff. And I thought Steve went very soft on it. Again, I'm friends with Steve. This is no hate. He has his reasons. Like, he was quite impressed with various aspects that they'd done with the Steam machine. But I've watched a lot of their content. So, you see the waste of silicon stuff and a lot of the harsh criticism that AMD and NVIDIA get, which is totally warranted, in my opinion. I'm just not seeing that with the Steam machine. I felt like, given the pricing and what this thing offered, and the fact that we strongly believe it's dead on arrival, I found their review very soft. But again, maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's just my take on it. If I was reviewing it based on everything I saw and the numbers that I just worked out from their review, dead on arrival product, very bad deal. Gamers should avoid it at all costs, really. It just doesn't make sense. I don't know what more to say.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of, I think the best way of putting it is cope around the pricing and the performance, the specs and everything on the Steam machine right from the start. So right from when it was announced last year up until we now have the price. There's been a lot of, I'm not saying that Gamers Nexus is doing this, to be clear. I'm talking
No.
The Twitter audience, Reddit audience, where maybe Valve gets a bit of an easier deal because people like the Steam platform. People want to like what Valve is doing. Fair enough. But I mean, I was sort of looking earlier today at how much they've been screwed by memory prices, because I think that's been the biggest cope around the price, is that it's priced where it is because Valve was screwed over by the pricing of memory and that sort of thing.
I felt like I was getting a sense that was the out Gamers Nexus was giving them. And again, I don't think their review is necessarily bad or anything. It just, with knowing Steve the way I know Steve, I was like, ooh, this is going to be bad for Valve. And then I got to the end of it, I'm like, okay. They seem to have gone, in my opinion, a bit soft on this for whatever reason. And I think one of the big outs they gave them was the memory pricing.
Yeah, and it seems to me that this is Valve essentially using memory prices as an excuse to price it where they have, not necessarily based on the reality of what these components are costing them. So off-the-shelf prices for some of the parts in the Steam machine, 16 gigabytes of DDR5 SODIMM memory, so a single stick, base model, cheaper stuff on Newegg, that is costing you around $190 US as a consumer. So that's the cheapest sort of stuff. It did used to be $50, so obviously it's much more expensive. And then for high-end sort of Corsair memory as opposed to no-name memory, we're still talking about DDR5 4800 SODIMM. It's costing you about $230. The 512 gig SSD, that is around $70 to $100 at the moment, up, of course, by about 2x compared to what it was. And then 2 terabyte SSDs, you're looking at $200 to $250 US. And of course, 8 gigabyte GPUs as well. We have to factor that in. All of those models have gone up by about $50. So the additional price to get an 8 gigabyte GPU compared to what they were is about $50. So one of the immediate red flags that I have looking at just SSD pricing, for example, is that if you can get a 2 terabyte SSD for $200 to $250 US at retail, why is Valve charging $300 to get the 2 terabyte model? That is immediately a more profitable system based on what I can see. They would be making more money off the 2 terabyte model, especially because you have to factor in that they don't have to give you the 512 gig SSD. So the price delta to go from the 512 gig to the 2 terabyte, it's more profitable. So if this was a real sort of like we're getting screwed by memory prices sort of pricing, the 2 terabyte model should probably be at least $100, maybe $150 US cheaper than it is if they were sort of trying to give gamers the best possible deal, not gouging them based on, adding that additional memory. But then even if you look at the pricing of the components, like $190 for the DDR5, $70 to $100 for the 512 gig SSD, and then an additional $50 for the GPU over what they would have had to pay previously, they're probably only looking at having to spend about $250 more on the BOM cost than they were previously. So in normal pricing, mid-2025, about $250 more than standard pricing. So, if we're looking at a $1,049 system, that means that in normal times, they would have been pricing this at like $800, maybe $750 if we were optimistic. And even that is like not a good price for this system. Like in that time, that would not have been a good price, would have been dead on arrival. And I still think at that price, it would have been quite profitable for Valve based on what I would assume is the BOM cost.
Yeah, not a hot take in my opinion. Even today, it's still dead on arrival. Because for me, it is a complete deal breaker if you cannot upgrade the core hardware. It's the entire point of PC gaming versus buying a console. Mm-hmm. Where the Steam Machine model makes sense is when it's dirt cheap.
Yeah, when it's console priced.
Yeah, when it's so much cheaper than building an entry-level PC that's like, it's worth just having this more disposable model than this highly upgradable platform. So
yeah, and to be clear, that is exactly what current consoles are. The Xbox Series S at $380, that is, you're not buying a gaming PC for that amount. And then a PS5 digital for $600. What sort of gaming PC can you build for $600 right now? Like basically nothing. So the compromise is they're not upgradable, games are more expensive, etc. But the hardware is dirt cheap. Whereas Valve is kind of giving you the worst of both worlds. It's expensive and you're not getting the benefits of the PC platform.
Yeah, and then not to harp on, but I mean, that's not the only compromise. The list of compromises goes on. But talking about just that aspect of the hardware, sure. But ignoring all of that and circling back to the memory stuff that you were just talking about, I get the point you're making and it's valid, but at the same time, it's also entirely irrelevant because it's all relative. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's whether or not it costs more to buy the memory for the Steam Machine. Well, it also costs, like the PCs we're comparing it to, they suffer the same issue. So the memory for the PCs we just discussed, that's gone up. The storage for those PCs, that's gone up. So if prices go down, it goes down for everything. And like you could, if you're looking at this from top to bottom, you could say, well, the inflated DRAM pricing and NAND pricing really hurts the entry-level stuff because those who are buying 5090s, they can absorb those costs. It's no, when you're already spending so much on your system, a bit extra on your storage, a bit extra on your DDR5 memory, not a huge deal. But at the entry level, it really hurts because it's making the systems, significantly more expensive in terms of percentage. But when you're comparing Steam Machine with entry-level PC, they both suffer to the same degree. Like it doesn't hurt one of those things more than the other. It's very much it's relative, as I said. So it's an even playing field. So I'm not sure what more to say on that. And though I will just, when we're talking about the hardware, I know a lot of people will say, but it's the form factor. All the PCs you guys have discussed are full-blown desktop PCs, which I think appeal to more gamers because of reasons. But let's say it has to be Mini-ITX, which is actually a form factor that I don't particularly like because everyone goes nuts for Mini-ITX PCs. They're really cool and this, and then you build one and then you have to live with it. And for most people, they're just a pain in the ass because whenever you have to change something in it, you'd rather do anything else than have to deal with a Mini-ITX PC. But personal gripes aside, Tim, you can build a high-end Mini-ITX PC for the same or less than the Steam Machine. Like there's no huge premium associated with Mini-ITX these days. Like there is a premium, but there are a lot of cheap cases and stuff. And I was looking at, again, the 2 terabyte Steam Machine without the controller is $2,100 here in Australia. For $2,000, I can build a Ryzen 5 7500F system with a Gigabyte A620i AX motherboard, Mini-ITX motherboard, Kingston Fury, 16 gigabytes, 6000 CL36 memory, a Radeon RX 9060 XT, 16 gigabyte. So that's an important detail. The Silverstone Shugo SG13 case, an 850 watt power supply, 2 terabyte SSD, and an all-in-one liquid cooler. $2,000 you can get that for. But the main takeaway is you can build a Mini-ITX system with a Ryzen 5 7500F, which is a much more powerful CPU, with a Radeon RX 9060 XT 16 gigabyte, which is a world's more capable and powerful GPU, all for slightly less than the 2 terabyte Steam machine, but you'd also be getting a 2 terabyte SSD in the Mini-ITX PC. So
yeah, not great. not great at all.
That system, again, just to be clear, is over 60% faster on average.
Yeah. So it's enabling an entirely different tier of gaming experience. Much more likely to play modern games, much more likely to play those games at higher settings, longer longevity, upgradable, the whole works.
Yeah, can play F1, can play Fortnite. There's no comparison. It's absurd.
Yeah, and I think, once again, like, I remember thinking back to the criticism that we got on our original podcast on talking about the Steam Machine, when we were sort of going through all these challenges that it would have, the sorts of, pricing that we were expecting, and etc. And a lot of the criticism, and even on that video I did on the Hardware Unboxed channel, talking about how I said I don't think people will be buying this system in this year because it's going to be too expensive. It's going to price people out. People aren't going to be interested. And, people were sort of saying things like, well, Valve is going to get contract pricing for memory, and that'll absorb some of these pricing issues. I think we're actually seeing the opposite of that they haven't been able to secure contract pricing, that the system is actually more expensive than off-the-shelf prices. So if anything, they've gotten a worse deal than the everyday consumer. That is, of course, if their excuse of it being priced the way it is because of memory prices holds up, which I don't think it does. I think they are trying to make a profit off this system. I don't think they're trying to subsidize this based on Steam software sales or anything like that, because that is the console model, right? Sony sells the PS5 at either break even or maybe a slight loss and makes up the rest of it on the storefront sales, whereas Valve is clearly not doing that. At least it seems that they are not doing that based on the pricing of this system. And yeah, I mean, I just think that I don't know what you would do with this system, right? Like, is there a way that Valve could have made this Steam machine something that was worth buying? And I guess when I look at that angle, it's sort of like they could have, they first of all, I guess they probably had to release this years earlier because the hardware is outdated today. So if this was released around the time a 7600 was an entry-level GPU, much more compelling sort of proposition, because those were the entry-level products at the time. Now entry-level GPUs are much faster. But then it probably still had to be cheaper. It probably still had to, being closer to being a subsidized system or something along those lines. It basically, and this is what we came back to in that podcast originally, this is a console. So it has to have console pricing. It has to be in that range of being around the PS5 base model sort of thing. And so without that, like we sort of said, it's a dead on arrival, no man's land sort of product. Do you think there was any way that they could have made this work, I guess?
Not really, because we already know the console model doesn't work.
Yeah.
As in, I mean, you could argue the model works, but in terms of like making the hardware feasible, it definitely doesn't work because they're heavily subsidized.
Yeah, so unless Valve was willing to do that.
But that's what I'm getting at. And does that, like, ignoring how you make the money up, whether it be from, storefronts or whatever, in the hardware itself, you can't sell it while breaking even or making a profit where it makes sense, because it's in all measurable ways worse than what gamers already have access to, which is the flexible PC platform. So I don't know how you take, like, you're basically saying, here are the parts that everyone has access to make their own PC. Now we're going to take some of those parts and make them worse, but by doing so, we're in no way making them more affordable to produce, and then we're going to sell them.
It's a difficult position, isn't it?
Like, it's like, what's making it better? And, you know, people are pointing to, well, the small form factor. Again, you can build small form factor PCs, but let's say it's a really small form factor. Okay, whatever.
It's not that small compared to a PS5 or other sorts of consoles that we've seen before.
I'm just saying, like, that's an angle people will point to, and then, you know, it runs the Steam OS, but you'll be able to install that, and you can install Linux and other operating systems on any device anyway, whether or not you want to.
Valve just announced that you can install the Steam OS on any PC that you build, as long as it's got an AMD GPU in it. So they've just, like, alongside this announcement, that is one of the things that they announced. So basically they're saying, yes, you can make, if Steam OS was the thing that you thought the Steam machine was good for, well, good news, because you can put that on any of the systems we've just been talking about, the entry-level PCs, provided we were talking about the AMD ones, and away you go. There's your Steam OS experience.
Yeah, that's a good point to raise, because yeah, you can. I'm just having a look now. The BYO PCs from PC Case Gear, again, Ryzen 5 5600, and you can get the 9060 8GB, 16 gigabytes of DDR4, and it's $300 cheaper than the cheapest Steam machine. So you could just buy that. It looks really cool, well-built system, and then you could just, so yeah, the OS angle doesn't really make sense. Well, it doesn't make any sense. I don't think the form factor makes any sense. I don't know. It's shaping up to be pretty much what we said from the start. Again, not to harp on about the upgradable angle, but stuff like the power supply, if it blows up or fails, it can't just simply be replaced, is my understanding. So it's not an external power brick. It is built into the system. So you would have to warranty your Steam machine. I'm not sure how that whole process would go if the power supply failed. So just stuff like that makes it far less flexible and just way worse to live with.
I think the issue that Valve has run into with this is, again, making it a console, but like, it is a console from the hardware standpoint, but it's a console that you can install Windows on. And so Valve has the ability to subsidize this system if they wanted to. Valve is highly profitable. The Steam platform is one of the world's largest gaming platforms. They make boatloads of money off the cut that they make from selling games on Steam. Exactly the same as you would see from Sony getting a cut from games that they sell on their PS5 storefront, same as Microsoft with their storefront. It's that part of the model is exactly the same. Valve takes, what, a 30% cut of most games? That's a huge cut, right? But the problem that they have that other consoles don't have is that you can't just easily install Windows on a PS5. So it is a gaming system. It's locked to doing what Sony wants you to do. It's locked into this ecosystem of, you buy games on the Sony storefront and we give you the discounted hardware to do so. With Valve's system, though, while they could subsidize it and make it really cheap and you can buy games on Steam, just with the way it works, you're not locked into doing that. You could install Windows on this and use other storefronts, bypassing Steam's model. You could use this as a cheap desktop PC for Chrome or something, right? Like, and in that sense, Valve would be making no money off it. They're not getting back the amount that they've subsidized for you, because you're not using it for that task. So the fact that it's sort of this, it is open, but also it's a console, but it's also a PC. It's trying to do all these things. They've landed in this position where they can't use the model that makes sense for a console, but they also haven't made it good enough to be a PC.
And I do wonder if that's why, Gamers Nexus didn't go as hard on the Steam machine as I expected they would, given everything we've talked about, is because Valve as a company haven't created this sort of closed off ecosystem like you see with Sony, which is less consumer friendly. So by being more consumer friendly, they've created an environment where they can't actually offer a product like the Steam machine and have it really make sense because of all the reasons we've spoken of. So it's hard to criticize. I don't know. It's a tough one, right? You don't want to crap on the product too much when they're like, hey, you can just use this operating system on whatever you want. But they're trying to provide like a base product as well. It's just a weird situation. I'm not sure how to feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously there are some, not as consumer-friendly parts to the console model, but I mean, it's not as consumer unfriendly as it could be if the PS5 was super expensive. They're trying to mitigate all the factors and go, well, we can't make this as consumer friendly as would make sense for our business model, but also the PS5 I don't think is an outrageous price. I think it's quite a good deal for gaming for people that want a simple system.
But that's what you're saying, they're able to subsidize that because they're doing other things that lock people into that platform.
Yeah, that's right. But I guess I'm sort of trying to justify, well, that is a less consumer-friendly aspect to the PS5, but they're not coupling that with making it $1,000. So
yeah, because they can't.
Well, they can't. I mean, if everyone was doing that, they could, right? Like if Xbox was that price, if all gaming systems were doing that, they could charge that amount. But I don't see that as being. It's kind of like a pros and cons sort of thing. Like the cons is you can't just run any operating system on a PS5. You have to go through the Sony storefront. But the pro is it's cheaper. So it all weighs out, I guess, in a sense for consumers to make it not as bad. So yeah, the Steam machine, I think my final just thoughts on it, as we've said throughout this video, it's dead on arrival. It makes no sense. They've been put in a hard position from multiple angles. And in my opinion, I just don't see any reason to purchase this. And I can't see myself recommending this to anyone for gaming.
Yep. I agree. And we should probably wrap it up there because I said the Gamers Nexus video was about an hour long and we're heading towards that. So if we cut it off in like the 40-minute range, people can't accuse us of going as long as Gamers Nexus did.
That's right. So let's wrap this video up. That's it on our Steam machine discussion. As always, if you like this sort of chat between Steve and I, we have the podcast, so go check out. We'll probably be talking a little bit more about the Steam machine in the podcast later in this week, so go check that out on the Hardware Unboxed podcast channel. We also have Patreon if you want to support Hardware Unboxed and all the things that we do here, all the testing, all the videos. If you sign up, you get access to cool benefits like our Discord community, monthly live streams, BTS content, and plenty of other good stuff. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.